Of the Gifted Performance podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video and subscribe for future content. For more information about our one-on-one coaching and other training or nutrition options, visit giftedperformance.com. Our newest feature, the Gifted Express, offers premium programming for bodybuilders, powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters, and lifestyle clients for only $30 a month. Enjoy the video. We'll see you on the next one. And as always, stay gifted. Welcome back. Another episode of the GPP Gifted Performance Podcast, giving you the knowledge, practical takeaways to improve your own general physical preparedness. We are going to start off this week's episode with a shout out to a viewer. I don't have the viewer's name in front of me because I don't give a shit what his name is. Oh, there we go. I already cursed in the first couple minutes. Yeah, there it goes. His comment on our last Q&A podcast was, and I want to read this correctly, it was boring. And, you know, we love to get feedback like that, that our podcast is boring to you. You can go ahead and, as Paul would say, GFYS, homie.
Probably
go ahead and Google that. But yeah, if it's, go find them. We actually got a hate comment towards Dom one time. It was like, take a shot every time Dom says something in this episode. And it was that stupid episode where you were stuck in the coffee shop. Yeah. Guys, we only accept positive comments. We only want thumbs up. We only want to hear that we are the best in the world. And if you want to say something other than that to a guy like Paul with his shirt off right now, looking absolutely delectable, take it elsewhere. It's all about positivity and good vibes over here. All right. Q&A episode for the day. We got 4 questions to answer. We're going to dive right in so we do not go over on our time because, you know, we love to ramble. Our first question comes from Juan Pineda, frequent watcher of the show, at JSP_training. How do you go about assessing fatigue through a training cycle? So when you look at your client's training from week to week, how do you go about assessing fatigue? Let's start from a hypertrophy standpoint, and then we'll kind of move over to maybe like a strength and performance from there. So Paul, Dom, when you guys are looking at your clients' training programs, how are you assessing fatigue? And are you even kind of like considering that fatigue when you are programming for the weeks to come, or is it like just a natural byproduct of training?
Yeah, dude. So I think so since we're talking about training and hypertrophy, I think the biggest thing is just the data that's right in front of you. You know, like what do the numbers say? Like, what are the numbers doing? Are you seeing trends, right? So, I mean, if we're recovering well from session to session and we're seeing that we're pushing training forward, so more reps are being done, more load is being done, that's good. But, you know, when we see those decrements in performance, that would probably be an indicator that we're not recovering well from session to session. So that could be presented as in like they go in and numbers, like they hit a certain set of numbers or reps or whatever on a specific week. Then the next session or the next week, they come in and performance is clearly decreased. Or you may even see fatigue through a session, right? So maybe they gas out a little earlier in a session. So that might be an indicator that a few things are happening. Like maybe they are under recovered, or maybe they're just working a little harder than they should be earlier in a session, or just doing too much volume over that session.
When you sit down to write programs, the assumption or the way you lay things out is that they should be able to make progress for the next 4 to 5 weeks, right? Like, if they come out of the gate and their performance drops off, is your first thought like maybe they came out too hot?
So it really just depends, right? So yeah, the idea is when training's made that, hey, hopefully they can make it through this entire training block or very close to the end of the training block before we see decrements in performance or a lack of progression. So potentially they could have trained a little too hard. I try to ensure that from happening by giving like recommended starting load and starting reps, which is based off of previous performance or previous phases. And I even try to keep those a little conservative, because I think it's okay to be a little conservative early in training, because we are going to push things forward and we are going to work harder, and eventually things are going to get really hard by the end of the phase, right? And I'd rather them not sort of hit that wall on week 1 or 2, right? So shit, what was that last part of the question?
Fuck if I know.
Yeah, but sometimes things change in a client's life too, right? Like, so those are things you need to consider and things you need to ask. Like, did the client hit the road that last week, and did they miss a bunch of their food, have really bad sleep conditions and miss a bunch of sleep? You know, so some things did a person switch jobs, their steps increased a lot. So you want to consider those things too, because sometimes under the previous training phase or previous training weeks, you would think that they should be able to recover from the block that you laid out based off of that data. But so many things have changed that that's no longer good data, right?
Dom, you have anything to add? I have 2 follow-up questions.
I like to look at like their set, like how their reps drop between sets. Usually you'll see, I can tell if somebody's fatiguing probably a bit too quickly. If it, first set is like a 12 reps and then the second set's like a 7. Maybe they're not taking enough rest. That could be an aspect of it that they need to focus on a little bit more. Or later on in the program, maybe there's just too much volume for them at this time and they're just not being able to, keep up with it. I think a lot of what is visually on paper that looks like fatigue usually comes from bad rest times. I think people don't rest long enough, and then we mistake it as fatigue when it probably wasn't, because when they come back the next week and do that same movement, they usually start off around the same or even better. So I think sometimes it's got to do with rest, which I guess is fatigue, but they're just not taking enough time between their sets. And then I think, too, like Paul said, I like to start people off not as heavy, because I can always tell them add 10 pounds rather than have to be like, all right, we're going to pull back 10 pounds. Or just do an extra rep or 2. Because we started with too much.
One thing I like to throw out there, too, if you are looking at fatigue within a session, and you do see a big drop off, those are follow-up questions I always ask. Like, hey, did something weird happen here? Did you take shorter rest break or whatever? Or if you see the opposite, their third set, they just blow their first 2 sets out of the water. I'm like, did something happen here? Did somebody talk to you for a while? Did you take a longer rest break? So getting that insight can be really important when you're looking at things like that.
Are you guys standardizing the rest times here? Or are you kind of just saying, hey, let's kind of rest as long as needed?
I mean, I like to tell people compounds, like, listen to a song and then do your next set, like at least 3 minutes. Just because, like, I feel like with compounds, because there's so much involved with them, like, you want to get a really good set out of it. Accessories, I guess it's more so like see how you feel kind of thing. And then I don't really tell people like times for that, but I think that is probably how I like.
What
to
I
do
wonder
it,
is if it matters so much how long the rest is versus is the rest consistent from week to week? Because, that might be some way that clients show progress from week to week, is that they're just resting longer between sets. They come out of deload, they're in their intro week, they rest for 90 seconds between sets because they feel really fresh, they feel really good, they write down their numbers, and then in week 2 that 90 seconds becomes 2 minutes, and then in week 3 it's 2.5 minutes, and then it's 3 minutes. So are you seeing an indication of progress based on the individual, or are you just seeing the individual work the system and progress by increasing their rest times?
I think that that's definitely an important consideration, but there's some self-regulators there too. Like, you can't do that for every set for an entire workout if you're doing appreciable volumes, or else you're going to be in the gym. You just made a 1 hour workout, or a 1.5 hour workout, 2.5, 3 hours,
whatever it takes.
So I like to give loose recommendations, but then some qualifications for how do you know that you're ready, right? So I will tell people, hey, for a big, heavy multi-joint lift, you probably don't want to take less than about 3 minutes, maybe 2, but you probably don't want to take less than about 3 minutes. And for your easier single joint movements, you might be able to take a minute. 1.5 minutes might be better, but even for myself, I still like to take about 2 minutes for my single joint movements. And then I explain to them, well, why? Because you don't want to still have a lot of fatigue to dissipate when you do that next set. You want to blow that fatigue off so you can get good work quality, good work volume. And then we talk about how, some of the research showing longer rest breaks tend to be better for hypertrophy or whatever. But then I say, like, hey, these are loose guidelines, right? Like you need to go whenever you're ready, right? So if you're still breathing hard, you don't want to do your next set because cardiorespiratory fatigue might get in the way of the quality of that next set. If you still have synergistic muscle fatigue, right? So you just do a set of squats, your lower back is still screaming. It doesn't matter if your quads are ready to go. You might not be able to get the best stimulus you can for your quads on your next set of squats because your lower back sort of taps you out early, or if your grip is fatigued, things like that. Like we want to make sure that we're able to give a high quality stimulus or high quality effort on that next set.
How does all of this change in the context of a fat loss diet? A lot of people will say, your volume tolerance decreases a significant amount when you enter a fat loss phase or when you enter a calorie deficit. I almost feel like some people convince themselves of that and use it as somewhat of a kind of like an escape route for, okay, I'm in fat loss phase. I can not train as hard, or I'm going to be way more fatigued, or I can't handle as much volume because I'm in an 8% calorie deficit, or I'm doing 20 minutes of cardio 4 times a week.
Yeah. I think a lot of people use that as a scapegoat to blame and like almost like mentally stop training as hard because they're in a fat loss. So like they think it's okay to get weaker.
So
because my last prep, I did not get weaker. My training progressed the whole way through. And I think that's a huge mental thing for a lot of these people. I think some obviously can't handle the amount of volume that's going on. But at the end of the day, somebody in a calorie deficit, for example, if they're dieting for a show, cardio is getting picked up. So their cardio fitness is coming up. So they might actually have better sets because of that. So their work capacity is coming up as their prep's going on. Because you could take somebody in the off season that's like really deep off season, not doing any cardio, high body fat. Their work capacity could be low because their cardio fitness is so low, affecting their performance in weightlifting. Versus the person in prep, they should technically on paper be able to do more.
My biggest consideration for moving from fat loss phases or calories changing, doing more cardio and stuff, is that you let feedback dictate the changes, right? You don't preemptively make changes because you're in a deficit. Now, later on in that dieting phase, that feedback may indicate that making changes could be a wise idea, right? Like if you're not recovering well from session to session, that may be an indicator that you may need to change the structure of your program or the volume of your program, right? If you're noticing that you're at the end of a contest prep and I'm wasting a lot of time with my warm-ups. I'm so fatigued. These squats are taking forever. I don't have much gas left for the rest of my training. I think that I could get a better stimulus and my training would be more efficient if I sub these squats out for hack squat. Then that feedback would indicate that. But yeah, definitely not a fan of making preemptive changes,
I wonder how much of that stuff can be kind of nipped in the bud just by setting an appropriate rate of fat loss or an appropriate schedule to stage. So you're not putting yourself in a position where you have to cut your calories so low or you have to take your cardio so high that it's cutting into your training. Because like Dom says, I have a rule, like if you're losing, I mean, if you come out of prep and you're not at least 85 to 90% as strong as you were going in, like you did some, like, especially if you're enhanced, you did some shit wrong. Like you did not do a good job of maintaining what underpinned that strength, which is muscle.
Yeah, so I think that last thing you said is a huge point, right? Because I would never tell somebody or I wouldn't tell everyone that they shouldn't lose any strength or anything, but it sort of depends too, right? Like if you have a lot of fat to lose, even if you give yourself the appropriate time, some of what contributed to that strength could have been leverages, especially on like barbell movements, you know, bench press and squat and things like that. Like a lot of people will sort of realize that if they lose strength, it's on movements like that. A little less so curls or tricep extensions or lateral raises, where leverages are a little less of are a little less of a factor in your performance, right?
I think. Go ahead. Go ahead. Keep going, Paul.
Basically, I'm just saying, like, hey, you might expect some greater or even potentially more drastic changes in some lifts and maybe not so much others.
Paul's saying it's cool to sandbag it. Don't worry about getting weaker. Just take it easy. Do some high reps to tone and firm.
Tone and firm, my favorite words. You know what's crazy is people don't actually know the definition of what muscle tone is.
Muscle tonicity?
But my thing, I think you can avoid the fatigue that comes at the end of prep just by being smart, like Paul was saying about movement selection. I feel like there's a certain point where you switch your Smith press to a machine press. You switch your barbell squat to a machine squat. And if you do that at the right time, you really never even feel the fatigue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Swapping
out some of those very globally fatiguing exercises that you have to load really heavy, or, you know, the weight itself is being supported by the large majority of your structure, where you're just getting a lot of fatigue in a lot of areas and not doing the best job at actually stimulating what you need to be getting done. So that's why you swap out for exercises like hack squat that take the load away somewhat from your back, so you can focus on your quads, do more leg press, things like that.
And something I'd throw out there too is that maybe some of these performance decrements or the degree of them might actually be avoided by making the correct performance or training modifications such as that. Or you may need to adjust your volume if you're sleeping 8-9 hours in your improvement season, but at the end of prep you're only sleeping like 4 or 5, and maybe sleep impacts you negatively harder than most people at the end of prep or something like that. Then yeah, like maybe adjusting your volume will kind of like save you on that.
Do you guys get like complete shit sleep starting at like 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, maybe even?
I was a piece of shit, right? So,
oh my God. Mine was so bad.
I picked up awful sleep habits my last year of college and my first year of coaching, and it took me a long time to fix them. So I went into prep on a bad foot for sleep. And it was just bad the whole way through.
I fucked it up from the start.
Yeah,
I didn't wait until 5 weeks out. I just did a bad job the whole way.
I probably didn't fix my sleep until like 6-8 months ago. It was like 2 or 3 years of just the wrong thing.
I feel like Dom gets good sleep. Dom looks like a guy who just gets good sleep. I can see Dom like rolling out of bed with a smile on his face, ready for the day.
I was sleeping pretty well during prep. At least I was going to bed at like 9, waking up at like 5, 6 pretty consistently.
That is good. That is very solid.
Even now, I'm in bed by like 10. People will like text me and they'll be like, "Are you awake?" And I'm like, "Nope."
No, I am not. All right. Our second question here comes from at C Charlie Moat.
Oh, wait.
1.
I do want to I want to add some stuff because we talked about training, right? But and I think training is your sort of best tool because the numbers say what they say. Like based on your goal, how you feel doesn't really matter that much.
How you feel is a lie.
Yeah. But I still think it is somewhat important to assess that stuff, like where I have a client whose training numbers will look pretty okay. But if I hit him with too much volume and stuff, he's just like, dude, I'm like waking up a bunch, like I'm not getting good sleep, like I'm stressed the fuck out. And I'm like, okay, like I might want to adjust your training volume, and we might want to address those components of fatigue, right? But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to throw that in there, that there's some other factors outside of just the numbers as well.
Oh, I guess I did also mention like performance and strength stuff. So I'm going to TLDR that one and say, if you are getting too fatigued too early in the training program, it's pretty easy when you have performance metrics to look at. So like subjective ratings of intensity will be higher in strength athletes than you would expect at a certain point in the cycle. They go in, they're supposed to hit a 405-pound squat at an RP of 6 or 7, and they come back to you and they say, oh, it's an RPE 9. That's a good indicator that they may be a little bit more fatigued than you plan for at that point in the cycle, and you may have to reassess. Like performance in like a competitive fitness is super easy because you can just look at like pacings on running, rowing, biking, things like that. So just those ones are a little bit easier because you've got a lot of objective data to look at. Whereas in hypertrophy training, it's a little bit more subjective and based on how the individual perceives how they feel. That's my wrap up there. All right, Charlie Mote, now is your chance to shine. Charlie asks, where would a deload be more optimal than a training break? Why one over the other? So this is a pretty interesting one because I know Dom gives people training breaks and Paul gives people deloads. So you can kind of like, Paul,
do both.
No, stop. You need to be in camps and we need a debate. We need a fight. So Dom is the complete training break guy. That's all he does. And Paul is always the deload guy. That's all he does. Now fight each other. And which one is better? Paul, we'll start with you. Why is your deload method, the Poly Rocket deload method, better than Dom's lazy take a complete break from training method?
I'm going to answer that completely differently than I was addressed. No, what's crazy is I remember first getting into like deloading and stuff, and people would say that it was much better to deload, right? That your performance or your gains or whatever, things would be better. But I've never really seen any data on that. Is there any data on that to say that deloading is better than just taking a little bit of time off?
It's hard because like the argument for deload being better is that it's going to provide greater long-term outcomes. So you would have to set up a study where you had two groups, one deloaded, one didn't, and you followed them in their training for what, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months to see which one got better results. Like, good luck with that.
So I actually can think of some scenarios, but the first thing I'd say is I don't really like the question because more optimal than what? And so I think we need to think about like, what is the purpose, right? What is the purpose of the deload? To diminish some fatigue. That is sort of the underlying, fundamental of whatever you're trying to get out of a deload or a training break. So as long as you do that and you check that box, you're okay, right? But like, how long is the deload? How long is the training break? For what purpose are you doing it? One of the few situations where I would say maybe a deload is more optimal than a full training break would maybe be peaking for a meet, right? Get a little bit of make sure your mobility stays good, practice some technique. Don't get stiff,
I'm not so sure that people actually call that a deload as much as they do a taper.
Yeah. I mean, it's I guess, what is the purpose of that final week of the taper?
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same thing that people are saying from a deload. It's to dissipate fatigue. And I guess a deload in a hypertrophy context would be that you drop off fatigue to ready your body for another 4 weeks of loading, 5 weeks of loading, whatever it is. Whereas the taper would be like a specific drop fatigue, maintain fitness to express higher levels of fitness.
And so I would say, like, when it comes to this question in terms of normal training and like the average person, like, go with what feels better to you and sort of matches your personality, right? Like, you know, if you know your training motivation and desire to train and, you know, how you're going to feel during and after that break is better for you, then yeah, take 3 or 4 days off and then get back to training. If you don't want to be out of the gym and you feel like you need to keep moving, or you feel like there's some sort of benefit you get there out of, you know, maybe, injury related things like what is it, sort of like rehabbing a little bit and getting blood in the area and, you know, keeping from getting stiff, then yeah, do your deload or whatever.
Got it. Deloads are better because they'll keep you from getting injured. Dom, any comments there?
You should just take time off, man. No, but I ask, how are you feeling? Like, how did you feel the last week of training? If they say like, oh, I'm pretty sore or I'm beat up, I kind of just trend to like, why don't you just take like 4 to 5 days off and then, well, you know, start your next meso. But, you know, so one thing I will say is a lot of the people who have like nagging injuries end up wanting to take the days off rather than deload. So that I kind of can understand because they just want to get a complete break going on. But I like both. I mean, personally, I don't do deloads.
Can I interject?
Just take a week off.
Can I interject on that?
Are you going to respond to Charlie? Because I have some responses to Charlie.
I'm gonna mute myself.
Charlie, I would also like to add bark, 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 woof, woof, woof. So check yourself.
The only thing I would say on that, and I think you're right, I think the natural response to having some nagging injuries is to take time off. But depending on the type of injury, sometimes that's kind of the worst thing that you can do. And you come back and the pain is just as bad or worse than it was when you left it off. There are certain things like elbow tendonitis that tend to recover a little faster by doing some kind of movement, you know, light movement.
Yeah, I'd like to have Mike around for something like that. But I mean, my operating premise is always that motion is lotion. So the best thing that's going to make that piece of your body feel good is getting in there and moving it under some light load or no load, some simple mobility stuff, just to get some blood flow into the area and kind of get that perception for the individual of, okay, I went to the gym, I moved whatever it was around, and it didn't feel that bad. I didn't experience that much pain, because what's going to come in a couple of weeks is they're going to have to get back in the gym and load it again. Like, they're going to have to actually load it. And what's going to be a better situation from a mental confidence standpoint? I've been moving it over the last couple of weeks and it didn't feel that bad, or I haven't moved it since it really hurt, and now I need to go back in there and I need to load it again at full capacity. One is going to feel a little bit better psychologically than the other. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So here's a third camp here, and this is kind of something that I picked up from Tom. And Tom, we know, is not a fan of the deload week whatsoever. Tom is of the opinion that instead of going from a deload week, you should just transition directly into the intro week for your next block. Intro weeks are inherently much easier training. There's probably some new exercises in there, so some neuromuscular stuff that you can get ahead of early on in a training cycle. So what would you guys say to someone who's like, you know, let's just skip over the deload altogether and go directly into an intro week?
As long as it's properly planned. I mean, it sounds like to me his intro week serves as the deload. He's just calling it something else, right? So, I mean, I guess it's still deload, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the work intensity and loading and volume and stuff is, but...
You know, Tom, it's always maximal.
I know, right? But what I would say is, like, just because you don't have to or don't need to doesn't mean that it can't sometimes be a good idea. You know, there are psychological factors of recovery that we should consider. The whole injury thing, like sometimes like tendon and connective structures and stuff in those tissues, you don't really know that when I guess injury is around the corner until they happen. They take longer to heal. They take longer to adapt. So like using them as somewhat of a preventative thing. And then also they're not hurtful, right? Like there's some decent data to show that you could take some entire weeks off of training periodically and not, one, not detrain that much, but two, not, I guess, over the long term, make very similar gains, right? Or make just as much. You would have gained just as much even training through those weeks. So it's at least not hurtful, and it can be helpful in some ways. And then, but I have found myself with some clients that I've had longer, clients who I can trust, their feedback on, and clients that have, I guess, more or less just sort of paid their dues as well, to where I may have them just skip a deloads from time to time or train a little longer. And, I'm like, okay, you just finished this phase. How do you feel? Okay, you're feeling good. I feel good about your feedback. Let's go into another 4 weeks of training. And then maybe next time we'll take the deload. Right.
Yeah. So TLDR, taking it home, driving the point home. Deloads are going to be a waste of your time. Taking time off from training, also a waste of your time. If you're not getting better, you are getting worse. If you're deloading once a month, that's 12 weeks out of the year that you are agreeing that you would like to get worse. So skip it all, roll right into your next intro week. And of course, as always, go to giftedperformance.com/Mike-Taylor when your elbows and knees start hurting so he can fix you up. It all feeds in.
Plugging everybody.
It all just feeds into itself right there.
It's just a big machine.
It is. It really is. All right. Our next question comes from Austin at WPB Consulting. He says, what are your thoughts on GDA supplementation during the off season? Dom has had come full circle on GDAs. Used to not be much of a fan. Started using them recently and thinks that they are offering some benefit. Dom, expand on that. Why have you come so far?
Well, I think the GDA has to be a good one first. I think there's a lot of really big bullshit ones that have like really poor dosing of, these supplements that help, with blood sugar control.
Don't be shy. You can name names.
I've been using Nuthix, Scooby's company. He has great supplements, and I use the GDA Max from them. And I just use one with a few of my meals a day. And numbers don't lie. My reader, if I don't take it, is up. If I take it, it's, down like at least 10 points. And there could be some there could be so many variables with that, like how hydrated I am, how much salt the meal had, how not depleted, but like how low my just serum blood sugar was before the meal. That all is going to take into account too. But I have noticed that I take one before bed and my fasting blood sugar has gone a lot lower. My A1C's dropped 0.2% in a month, which is actually a big swing considering A1C is a 3-month average. So to have it actually move after 4 weeks is pretty big. But again, it could be other variables of things I'm doing, but I'm sure it is helping. Today I woke up with a fasted in the 80s, and I haven't seen that in a while. And I took one last night before I went to bed. So I don't know, there's other variables, but I definitely have became a believer in them. But I don't think, so one thing a lot of people use GDAs during is like carb ups for shows. And I think at that point, you should be pretty insulin sensitive to where you probably don't need that. In my opinion, at least. I think it's kind of like, why take the risk of you don't know how you'll respond to some of these minerals and things in there. Like, what if it messes with your stomach in the middle of carb loading right before a competition? Like, is it really worth it at that point? But my whole thought process is really low body fat, really low calories, insulin sensitivity is pretty high. It's a big reason why you rebound with fat so much afterwards. But I've definitely came full circle with them. I think they actually do their job, but they have to be properly, dosed, and everything has to be pretty good about them.
Before we dive any deeper, Dom, do you have like specific ingredients that you look for within the GDA, the ones that you do trust versus maybe the ones that you're not so sold on?
I think it has to have berberine, it has to have chromium, it has to have cinnamon, and it has to have I don't know how to say it, but it's like vandalay something, vandalay sarvate or something like that. That's the those are the 4 ingredients I think are needed in it for sure. And then obviously doses have to be pretty good as well.
And what you can do is you can go over to examine.com and look at those ingredients. And what you will see on those, because I've looked those 4 up before, is that the human effect matrix, which is how they basically gauge how well these things work, seem to show either a small or a moderate effect in glucose control for all 4 of those.
Vandalate, whatever. I don't even know how to say it, but mimics almost the actions of insulin.
That's something I wanted to ask you about, Dom, is I would sort of think that it's important to consider what aspect of glucose control you're trying to attack, right? In terms of like, is it an insulin mimetic, or is it for some reason just causing you to pass some of the carbs, or is it for some reason just causing lower liver production of glucose, right?
Yeah.
Like you probably want to be somewhat specific depending on your reason for using them as far as which GDAs you use, right?
Yeah, and I think, well, the Nuthix one, I think, is a really solid one because it covers a few of those aspects. Like Vandalite is an insulin mimic, and then berberine, it works like metformin, so it slows down liver gluconeogenesis so that, you're not pumping out a bunch of glucose from your liver, therefore bringing blood sugar down. Then you have the Vandalite acting the way it does, and then cinnamon and chromium act like can help move glucose into a cell. So I think that's why I think it's a really good GDA, because it kind of covers all, and their doses are pretty solid. Like each pill is 200 milligrams of berberine, which is actually a decent amount. But like other companies, you see like 50 or 10, and it's not going to do anything.
So something I'd like to throw out is that it just seems like a lot of people just take it because they think it's a good idea, right? Like they're not measuring blood sugar, or they're not doing it because of what their blood work reflects. And I don't think that's necessarily like the greatest idea. But also I would urge people who are planning on doing these things and using GDAs not to treat it as a Band-Aid, or use it as just a fail safe just because, right? I would probably urge these people prior to doing that, like, hey, keep an eye on your activity, your sleep, your body composition, because those are going to be like your number one tools to sort of influence, sort of your metabolic health and make sure that you stay healthy. Right. And, and just for example, I have a client who had very poor sleep, and his fasting blood glucose wasn't alarmingly high, but it was pretty high. It was like in the 90s. And it was just like, why? You're decently lean. Like, why is this happening? This shouldn't be like this. And I couldn't really, I was like, I just didn't get it. It just didn't make sense. And, so it's like, okay, like you can get a metformin prescription. We'll try that. And not much change happened. And then, we were having a conversation about sleep. And so he started to take it more seriously. And we noticed that when he gets good sleep, his fasting blood glucose drops to like 70, 80, right? And so I would address those things first, before you get some very small or negligible effect from, just pounding supplements thinking they're a fail-safe.
Yeah, I think when we look at the lifestyle factors compared to a supplement, regardless of how it's dosed, fixing your sleep, being physically active, monitoring your body composition, all of those are going to be orders of magnitude more effective than something like GDA, but a GDA might push it over the edge and offer you that small extra benefit that will actually help in the long run. And then you kind of weigh all right, what does this cost me in terms of like monetary commitment versus what benefit does it give me? Is that something that I can justify?
Yeah.
But what Dom said is actually funny about like people using GDAs when they're like peaking or when they're like deep into prep. They're like, oh, coach gave me a cheat meal. So I went out, 1,800 calories of like burgers and fries, but I brought my GDA with me, so I'm good to go.
Yeah, bro. Save the fat, man. Oh, dude, I had a client one time. She got asked, does your coach have you on a GDA? And she said no. And she's like, oh my God, why? You should be on a GDA because they stop carbs from becoming fat. And I was like, dude, this girl is so like, I was like, that is bad. Like, you cannot. This is what you think this thing does?
It's funny because we used to think that was a strong mechanism in humans because we saw it in rodents. But humans actually, it's a lot harder for us to convert carbohydrate into fat. Right?
Things that like stop digestion of a macronutrient are like very bad side effects. So if you think back to like Olestra, the stuff they used to put in potato chips, that was like a fat blocker. It would like, I think it like stopped lipase or rendered lipase like ineffective in the stomach. And the side effect was that you would just poop out oil. Like you would have oily stool. So like what would be the side effects of something that, what did you even say, Dom? Stops carbs from becoming fat. Oh, like
yeah, like okay. Yeah. You might as well take DMP at that point.
Might as well. That is Dom's recommendation there. We're going to make that the caption. We're just going to clip that. It's just going to be Dom saying, might as well take DNP. Off it goes. Paul, anything to add on GDAs? Anything to bring us full circle there?
Nah.
Okay. All right. Our last question comes from a person whose Instagram name is hard to pronounce. I think it's Zolent.
Probably Zolent 187.
Zolent 187. Zolent asks a good question. It's a question that I think we all have to deal with at sometimes with our clients, or for people who are just getting into food tracking for the first time. Zolent asks, where can one get accurate nutritional information on foods? I think Dom and I might have answered this question on an IG Live once, and Dom's answer in jest was something like, check the food label. So that'd be a good place to start, the food label. But the FDA does allow a certain percent of error on food labels. So how accurate is accurate? Because if you're looking for 100% accuracy, then the food label is also not going to be accurate.
I mean, you're just not going to get it. All right, you're not.
The USDA.gov has a good database.
Yeah. So what I tell people to do, because you
Paul,
run
you're
into
quiet.
this what I tell people to do, because you run into this all the time with clients and tracking macros. They just find the first thing that they see on MyFitnessPal or whatever the name looks good, and they just toss it in there, and it's totally wrong.
It's like white rice, 4 cups, 100 calories. That looks good.
Oh, okay.
That looks good.
I'm going to find the one with the lowest calories to track.
Yeah, I just want to throw out, it's not that fucking hard. Like, don't be fucking lazy. No, seriously, sometimes it's literally as simple as like, oh, let me turn this label around real quick and make sure it matches what my MyFitnessPal says. But do your due diligence, like just Google the fucking thing and like look at a couple websites, make sure a few websites match, nutrition data or whatever.com, Nutritionix, and then, the FDA or whatever. Cool. If you find a few sources that match, or you find a few that are in agreement with each other, try to find an item on MyFitnessPal that matches that.
The one that gets me all the time is cooked rice. Oh, I'm done. I'm not even going to talk.
Dude,
that's it. Cooked rice.
Gets me all the
got a
time
problem.
are like meats, that like, or they'll count, like they'll measure the ground beef cooked. And I'm like, hey man, the nutrition facts for that product on the label are for the form that it comes in. Like when you buy food, that's what the nutrition facts are for. But yeah, man, or like people will, cook the noodles and weigh it, but use the nutrition facts for like dry fucking noodles.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, I get 4 noodles.
Data Central Food Data Central is a good website. It's the government's website for all of the food. Like they have cooked rice here, 100 grams of rice, white, short grain, enriched, cooked, and 100 grams is 28.7 grams of carbs. And I always thought 100 grams of rice is close to 30 grams of carbs. Yeah. But then you see people post like, oh, this is how you measure cooked food. And I'm like, dude, that's not even close. Like, that's not even close to 30 grams.
Drives me nuts when people use like cups and stuff.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. Like, just use grams, dude.
Don't want to use the metric system. The hell? This is America.
I had a client tell me they were peaking for a show, and I said, how much water do you have left for the day? Like, out of the limit I get. And I said, how much
Stuffing
water
down
do
at
you
the
have
local
left for
bar
the day?
to get
Like,
a pint.
A limit I get. Like, he's from Macedonia, so he was like, oh, you Americans, I forgot. I have 16 ounces left.
I always remember a pint is 16 ounces because it's a pint per pound when you lose a pound of water in training or in exercise. So
a water bottle
16 ounces in a pint.
This is a pint, a water bottle.
Really? I think those are I thought those were like
5
20
pints.
ounces. Yeah, it's a little bit more.
It's a little more than a pint.
Yeah. All right, here's a follow-up to this question. If you are being reasonable, if you're following Paul's recommendations of like, hey, if something looks a little weird, just like Google it, like check more than once on if something is correct. Does 100% accuracy in your food tracking even matter? Is it something that you should even waste your time thinking about or trying to achieve?
So I get where you're going with this. Like, consistency matters the most probably when it comes to change. So if you're wrong, as long as you're consistently wrong, at least when you change things.
Wrong to a small degree, not like horribly wrong.
So yeah, that's what I mean. I think it can matter, right? I think that's stuff I try to nail early on because weighing cooked chicken versus raw chicken like causes some pretty big differences.
That's a big difference. I didn't say big differences, Paul. I said small differences. What the fuck?
Well,
track the protein in rice.
I think what kills me is like the meal plans that I get from like someone when they switch coaches, and it's like, all right, my meal plan was 4 ounces of meat, 4 ounces of carbs, and a handful of vegetables. The swing there on calories could be so insane. Like,
I think the ounces thing is tough because a lot of scales don't even do tenths. So it's like you don't know if you're eating 3.5 or 4, or it could be just rounding up on this scale.
If
people are using scales without tenths,
yeah, I was about to say
some people have scales without tenths. I had a client ask me if mine measured in tenths, and I said, "Yeah, yours better should too."
What? That's wild. Paul, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say you need to get a new fucking scale if you don't have like at least a point something.
Yeah, you better have like a drug dealer scale. Like when people come over to your house and you're weighing out your food, they better also think, oh, this guy also like sells weed or something like that. That's how accurate you need to be. Especially if you're like weighing out supplements, like don't even use your scale that use tenths. You need to use a scale that is way more sensitive than that.
Those like mini scales that are like
the actual drug dealer scales. Yes, those ones. Those are the ones that you need. Because I've got clients that are like weighing out like beta alanine before a workout, and they're like, all right, it's at like 2 grams. I'm going to add some more. Okay, it didn't tick over to 3. I'm going to add some more. It didn't tick over to 3. I'm going to add more. And then it ticks over to like 6. And they're like, oh, well, here we go. About to get real itchy.
Yeah, those scales that like you can't breathe on it too hard.
Yeah, you got to keep your distance from it. So my input to Zolent is that 100% accuracy in nutrition tracking is probably something that you're not going to find. Follow the basic, guidelines that Paul has laid out here. And then Dom has also done a good job of like, tracking your food, how to weigh your food, being accurate with that. And you should get 95 to 98% of the way there. If you're still not, getting the results that you would think, you might have to look a little bit deeper.
Dude, you know what's
into
crazy?
what could be going on.
Is like it'll give people so much anxiety that they just like give up, right? Like, one, it's not that hard, and two, it shouldn't give you anxiety. Like, it's not hard to Google a few sources, and like, it's just just do it.
I think for brand new clients, it can be a little bit hard to go from like no nutritional like benchmark rules at all, just like freestyle, eat whatever you want, whenever you want, it doesn't matter, to go to like weighing everything, tracking everything, knowing how to cook everything. It can be a lot all at once. But luckily, there are some kind of things like you said, Paul, when you get them first started to kind of bring them up to speed in a hurry to kind of make that learning curve a little bit less painful.
Yeah, like read that part of your sheets that you get.
But I always assume that people that call themselves macro coaches, you guys seen that? People that just call themselves macro coaches, they're just out there like giving people 3 numbers and they're like, all right, go crazy. I'm not going to teach you how to track, how to weigh, how to eat reasonably. And if you fail, it's 100% your fault.
They charge $400 a month for macro.
$400 a month. How much is that per macro? Are we counting fiber? Because it's $100. I think it's $100 per month per macro that they change. If we include fiber, it's $133.33 if you're only changing protein, carbs, and fat. So
make sure. On the fiber end, is it insoluble and soluble?
Oh wow, that's a lot of value that you would be providing right there. You telling them how much beans versus how much celery to eat. That's serious coaching.
2 calories per gram of soluble fiber.
Yeah, you got to factor that in.
That's another factor. Okay, what if they're drinking? That's alcohol, 7 grams.
That's too much. That's too much. That's my next coaching package up.
Don't even text me on a Friday night asking how to count alcohol, dude. You can't afford it.
Yeah, we don't do that stuff around here. This is serious business. You want to meet your goals? It's protein, carbs, fat, fiber. That's it for the rest of your life. You can also sprinkle in some water.
Yeah, calorie-free recreational compounds only.
That's words to live by right there. You can have a fun time for 0 calories. So just adjust your preferences, adjust your morals, decide how you want to live your life. Do you want to be a dirty alcohol drinker that sips the devil's tonic? Or do you want to be someone who's out there having a calorie-free party time? Sort yourself accordingly. Let us know below. Comment below and say, I do hard calorie-free drugs, or I prefer to drink calorie-rich alcoholic beverages. And we'll respond accordingly. Gentlemen, anything to add on the end of this, or should we send it off?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. This episode will come out on Thanksgiving. This episode's coming out tomorrow, guys, on Thanksgiving. We're recording this on Thanksgiving Eve, guys. That's dedication. Dedication.
Thanksgiving.
You can listen to it on your way to the biggest bar night of the year.
Yes. Meet with all your high school friends, hook up with your ex-girlfriend from high school, get her pregnant, regret it for the rest of your life.
Biggest bar night in the world?
The night before is the biggest bar night of the year.
Thanksgiving Eve.
The night before.
Yeah. The girls are all working tonight. Partying. I think Lenny and I are going to go out there and rage a little bit, crack some beer bottles over some high school kids' heads, start some fights. The stuff that makes life fun, makes it worth living. All right. That brings us to the end of our podcast. Took a little bit of a turn there at the end. Happy Thanksgiving from the Gifted family. We love you and we are very thankful for you. We'd be even more thankful if you dropped a like, comment, subscribe, sent this to all of your friends so they can learn a little something on this most grateful of day. Have a good one. We'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, hold on, Paul. Stay gifted.
Bye.
Perfect.